Okay, so with that, I think I open up to another interesting panel discussion, and again, a very futuristic topic where I talk about the future of digital assets alongside two of another esteemed leaders coming from very different walks, one from an established bank. So please welcome Andre Chan, Innovation Lead at Siam Commercial Bank TechX, and Charu Sethi from the Chief Marketing Officer from Unique Network. Thank you guys and welcome to Bank of Tomorrow Summit 2022. So today we talk about a very interesting topic, and I think it has been a buzzword and also one of the top discussion points in most of the banking leader conversations is the future of digital assets. It has become an interesting thought where leaders are exploring the opportunities as well as in terms of how do we experiment and implement the right use cases of digital assets into the banking and financial ecosystem. And that's what brings us to a very valid point of what do we understand and what do we mean by actual digital assets. So let's hear it from Andre and Jaru as they demystify the very essential concept of what are digital assets.
Yeah, maybe I'll go first. So I think from a technology company's perspective, especially I think dealing with multiple fintechs as well as like multiple types of like business lines within traditional financial verticals, digital assets I think like can actually mean a couple of things, right? In general, people treat digital assets as their as cryptocurrency, right? Cryptocurrency as well as like non-fungible tokens and that live on chain. But I think like there is actually a much greater aspect towards like what we think can actually constitute an asset, like right. And if I just kind of like demystify the word out a little bit, digital asset just means anything that is digitized, right? Tokenized, whatever you want to call it. There are aspects of like things like identity, right? That I think and data that we feel that is also constitute something of digital assets, right? As well as I think like the concept of ownership, whether does it sit together with the customer, does it whether it sit with the individual or a so-called like business, that itself also constitutes itself into like a form of digital asset, right? And in terms of like transferable value, if you will. So I think like that's kind of like the background in terms of like the layout and the context that we probably should kind of like understand, right, before that. And then of course, like in I think the terms back to, with regards to what you said, right, Varnika, like digital assets and everything becomes a buzzword. It is true that financial institutions as well as like non-financial institutions included have been looking into the specifics of like how do I actually find a use case for a cryptocurrency or a digitized currency, if you will, right? As well as like stamps of ownership, right? That stem from things like NFTs and whatnot that actually are already within the Web3 open space.
Right, I
Yeah,
agree.
I
And
yeah.
please go ahead, Charu. Yes.
Okay. No, I just agree with what Andre said. And digital assets is indeed a wider term beyond the scope of cryptocurrencies or NFTs. And as
Mhm.
rightly sort of penned by Swift, their definition of digital assets is these are virtual records of value that can be stored or transferred across a ledger that is cryptographically secured. So, which then means that digital assets are of course, beyond the buzzwords that we hear today.
Right. So, if, now that you've given us such a beautiful definition about it, so where do you think banks are envisioning these digital assets to actually get embedded into their ecosystem? So, what kind of use cases are they exploring at the moment?
Yeah. So maybe let's draw back away from digital assets a little bit, and I think talk a little bit about the principles behind what blockchain and it stands for, right? Especially open blockchain and Web3. The banks and it's not just the banks, but actually like majority of the companies that are interested to invest into Web3, I think start to look at what do I actually want to use in terms of the principles of Web3 and blockchain, right?
Right.
Um, one good use case that I believe is always discussed about is how do we utilize the so-called like digitization of and tokenization of an asset, right? Now, whether is it like equity holding, whether is it like a mortgage that you actually have, and kind of like use that to kind of like be more liquid within, let's say, the vertical silos of vertical silos within a traditional bank, right? So a hard example would be, and this is something like we used to always discuss offhand, is like I don't want to sell like $1 million worth of stocks just so that I have some cash in my bank so that I can go and like take a loan to buy a yacht, right? Can I actually kind of like take a loan with that, then tokenize that so-called like dealing in such a way that I use that as collateral? And if let's say if I can't meet a margin call on my loan, it gets transferred over to the lender, right? That's something in itself that actually cannot be done in today's aspect because these verticals do not function the same way, right? So that's one very like simple, I guess, like a use case that I think people are talking about. But going back to what I said with regards to like digital assets and identity, right? Decentralized identity and so-called like self-ownership of like customer data as well as like SME data is something that also plays a very big role, I think, in so-called like allowing traditional KYC processes, right? Traditional KYB processes to kind of give access to access of liquidity to people that traditionally would not have actually like have gotten, right? And this goes back to some of the principles of Web3, where we want to have overall accessibility, overall so-called like and kind of like banking the unbanked kind of like idea, and really greater outreach, right? And of course, like I think you have the traditional use cases of like how do I actually help a user interact with, let's say, like DeFi applications, right? That is actually quite complex to understand most of the time, just because of the technical nature of how like a blockchain is, right? So there are a multitude of use cases. These would be like kind of like some, I think, just really at the tip of the iceberg.
Wow, thanks, Andre. And what do you think, Charu?
Yeah, I think just taking a bit of a step back as well. Why are banks really envisioning this, and why are banks thinking about it? Because
Yeah,
digital assets are sort of driving the competition for banks from sort of multiple directions. And one is the crypto native firms with big ambitions in finance. And then, and of course, they've demonstrated high profits at some point. Then there is the speed of transactions through decentralized finance and at lower costs as well. And then the third force is about central banks launching their own digital currencies. So banks are sort of forced to think about with these because of these forces. And a bit about how do they envision is, I think it's a bit parallel to how they've envisioned digital transformation over the years and decades.
right.
One segment is really customer engagement and experience angle, and
Yes.
where we see various trends shaping. For example, from a recent Gartner prediction, by 2025, 10% of the workers will use virtual spaces for activities like sales and customer engagement, remote teams,
Right.
collaboration, and onboarding. And then this also a focus on storytelling, training simulation, and all of that is actually also making the gaming industry move beyond just entertainment. So this is the so-called serious gaming industry, which is also expected to grow at a rate of 25%. And then the other trend is about how sophisticated the AR, VR capabilities are getting, and how our digital twins or humanoid robots are able to now interact and interpret gestures. So if you think
Yeah.
of all these three or four trends, then you can imagine delivering a new form of enhanced customer engagement and experience, which
Yeah.
sort of DBS did, had started the roots with announcing a metaverse for engaging with the customers, and at the same time delivering their key messages around sustainability.
True.
Then, so this is the engagement experience way of bringing these technologies in. The other is a sort of product enhancement, creating new products and revenue models, which also touches a little bit into the core transformation in some cases. And
Right.
there, I think where the major opportunity lies is in the private equity, securities, and debt market. Now, for example, there are about 98,000 firms with over 250 employees as within the OECD member countries, and only
Right.
22,000 firms are listed publicly. Right. So digital assets allow for more efficiencies in administration of assets for
Mhm.
alternative asset managers. And therefore, if you think about the rest of the firms that are not publicly traded, there is a scope
Yeah.
of creating tokenized representation of assets and more products. Similarly,
True.
for debt, massive amount of debt is not traded in the public markets. Real
Mhm.
estate, there is so the private real estate market, the global real estate is about $317 trillion, but only $10 trillion of it is managed as funds. So
Right.
all of these gaps and inefficiencies sort of have major opportunities to deliver more efficient and accessible new digital investment products. That's a very big topic, but it's about new products and engagement and experience, two ways to look at digital assets.
Just
Exactly. So that is,
sorry,
and yeah.
Varnika, just a quick one. I mean, like, I think like if really, I think like if we go back to like use cases, right? This is actually like I think what we like to kind of coin as like something like composable finance, if you will, right? I think if you go back to the nature of like how people have been integrating to like large organizations such as banks, typically you would have like really long onboarding sessions, even from a technology integration level, right? Open
Yeah.
API, for example, has been a topic forever, but it kind of like never really took off. Whereas like innovation in DeFi, has been actually taking off really, really well because of the integratability of like the blockchain layer, as well as the capability of tokenization and representation, as well as the hard ownership and transparency that the blockchain brings, right? So I think I just wanted to add that point because like with regards to those markets, I think like there are many ways to spin it, right? By the end of
Yeah.
the day, what we're really talking about here is like open, proper, composable financial productization, right? I think like that's what I wanted
Right.
to add.
So I think both of you made fabulous points. So I just want to bring you back to the topic where Charu you raised that there is an off point around humanized robots coming in where we saw the use case of DBS and HSBC even launching them into their branches as an interaction point with the customers. And now they're talking about banking in the metaverse, right? And it essentially starts by setting up this virtual branch where the customers can interact and become more in the form of avatars. So what do you think as as a growth opportunity for more larger banks to adopt this opportunity? Does that have that level of massive growth that big banks have started thinking about it, even started implementing in that area?
Charu, do you want to
So
go first?
Sure. Yeah, I think there is definitely a growth opportunity. Which way it'll go is still remains to be seen.
Right.
Nobody has exact answers of how this will shape or how this will look like in exactly 5 years from now. But what I would say is that given that the the potential that, for example, NFTs have. Um,
Right.
and we've seen examples in loyalty programs and rewards programs being announced by various companies, their hotels, and then there was a Starbucks example. Now,
Yeah.
the loyalty programs have always remained, but now what's possible is that these NFTs are stackable. You can um, add more content and benefits to the same NFT. And I
Yeah.
guess there's also sort of is the technology there, because what we've seen in NFTs and digital assets is so far is art and some use cases in gaming where you
Yeah.
create a piece of art, mint it, sell it. But when you want to explore and do more with digital assets and
Yeah.
talk about growth, does this have potential to keep growing? I think we need to see, do we have new technology coming up that's enabling broader and newer use cases? So, for
Right.
example, at Unique Network, we are an infrastructure play. We are building infrastructure for sort of advanced use cases of digital assets. So, when real life assets will be tokenized, or some of them will be tokenized, these assets will need a lot more capabilities like NFT to NFT or digital asset to digital asset relationships, one asset managing the other, or admin rights with those. stackable NFTs, composable NFTs. So I think when you start to explore these technologies and start building and adding that to the use cases you see today, I do feel there is definitely a, opportunities to grow and create new things.
Right.
However, I think just the banks and organizations, they need to have a little bit of a vision, and which will help them steer what they want to do and not get steered by all the
Yeah.
hype that they see around them.
Yeah, no, I mean like it's a funny thing, and maybe like my opinion is gonna be a little bit controversial, but it's just my opinion, right?
Right.
Metaverse as a word, I think like is overused a little bit, right? I think like if I dial down the kind of concept of like living a virtual life, that's something that has been around for ages, right? And
Yeah.
like I like to talk to like like my colleagues and whatnot, and saying like when they hype up metaverse, I said, guys, you spend like like 20 hours on your laptop and on your phone. You already do not live your life in reality, put it this way, right? So I think like the concept of like having a metaverse or an AR platform, etc. I think it's great, right? Because it's definitely a great way to kind of like change up the interaction level a bit, right? But at the same time, I mean, like, how many people are going to be putting on a headset for like the entire day, right? So the way
Exactly.
that I do see it from a
Mm.
strategic point of view, however, is that that actually allows customers to then start to use that channel to kind of interact back to, I think, what are the overall strategy with regards to like digital assets, cryptocurrencies, NFTs, and whatnot, so on and so forth, right? Because then I
Yeah.
go back to kind of like drawing people into this so-called like a conversation of how do I get involved without the
Mhm.
need of knowing finance? How do I get involved if I don't need to actually kind of like understand all these complexities of blockchain and whatnot, right? So I see
True.
that as a really great education channel, right? Because like
Mhm.
95% of the people I think still live in a so-called like buzzword world, if you will, right? I think they think they're in it, but they're not actually in it. But at the same time, definitely a good strategy, I think, to change up the interaction model with the people, just like how chatbots were changing that as well at that point in time, right? So I think that's my opinion around that.
I
Yeah,
think
and
families. Yeah. Please go ahead, Charu. Sorry.
no, just I just wanted to take back to a point that Ketan mentioned in the previous panel, that we'll see a lot more collaboration and influensive ways that the products will sell and the communities are the or the customers will interact. Now,
Right.
what these technologies and tokens and digital assets and DAOs are also enabling is a sense of community, right?
Right.
And right now, all of the banking customers, they, they are on their own. They don't
Yeah.
come together in a community format. And when you're able to create community through elements like shared ownership of digital assets, premium digital assets, that's when you start building a community and then harnessing that to leverage newer models of collaborative growth of the community. Collaborative, I mean, crowdfunding, crowd loans, all those things become very intuitive then in that case, and again, newer products could arise from that.
Absolutely agreed. And I think this is a discussion to be held a lot more in detail. And unfortunately, our time is up. But these are very fabulous points that you guys raised today. And I think I would love to have another conversation with you guys again on the topic. But thank you so much for sharing this today, Andre and Charu. It was incredible having you guys today with us on the summit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you, Varnika.